Hello, everyone. Welcome to our conversation today on employer-sponsored skills training in Canada. My name is Elise Watkins, and I'm the Manager of Strategic Initiatives at the Future Skills Center, and it is my pleasure to be with all of you today. So first, to go through our agenda, this will be a 90-minute webinar, and we will be starting with some framing and introductory content to help shape our discussion on employer-sponsored skills training. Next, we will have a look at some of the research from FSC's funded initiatives and have a deep dive on some of those findings we are seeing. And this will be followed up by an in-the-field discussion, which will address employer barriers and provide an opportunity for discussion and Q&A. Then we will close out our conversation with some final remarks. So on to our next slide, I would first like to acknowledge that I'm currently on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, also known to some as Toronto. These lands are now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The treaties that cover these territories include the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. As our work takes place across Turtle Island at the Future Skills Center, we also acknowledge that we gather on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations who have cared for these lands and waters since time immemorial. We are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and play on these lands and commit to learning about our shared histories and breathing life into the journey of reconciliation. Please feel free to share in the chat which lands you are joining from today. We would love to hear from you. So a little bit of housekeeping before we dive into our conversations. This session will be recorded and will be available to everyone who has registered in the following days, so keep an eye out for that. Also, we want to hear from you during this conversation, so please feel free to use the chat to comment and to ask questions. You will see on your Zoom panel a toolbar that gives you these options to interact with us during the session. And again, this is a bilingual event, so if you want to select your audio feed, turn on the interpretation button on your Zoom bar. It's the one that has the globe, and it will be off by default, but please choose either English or French. Great, without further ado, I'll get started. So at the Future Skills Center, we know that skilling up people has never been as important as it is now. And we see that Canada is facing skill shortages and productivity issues across many sectors and geographies. And to address this, we need businesses of all sizes to see themselves as both investors and benefactors of skills investment. And we know that this will be particularly important for our small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, as over 80% of Canadians are employed by these small and medium enterprises. And employer-sponsored training is really an area of growth for Canada and is something we haven't excelled in historically. So for instance, Canadian employers invest less in training per employee compared to their OECD counterparts. So today's discussion is about what we know and why, and how we can excel in employer-sponsored training to boost productivity and tackle those shortages. And we know that in the next decade, more than a quarter, so that's 25% of Canadian jobs, will be heavily disrupted by automation. And half of those jobs will require a new mix of skills, even if the job title stays the same. So this doesn't mean that jobs will go away by any means. It's just the opposite. And as recent headlines show, the Canadian job market continues to exceed expectations in job creation. And we know that in the digital economy alone, we will have over 2 million workers employed by 2025. And many of the jobs will require a different approach. The economy is going to require mobile, digitally savvy workforce that is constantly training, learning, upgrading to meet the needs of this ever-changing world. And we see that Canadian CEOs get it. Business leaders have long been saying that upskilling and reskilling is key to business success. And we see that skills rank as one of the top 3 risks identified by Canadian CEOs, and this was from the Business Council survey, when it comes to their business strategy. And despite this, only 16% of CEOs report that they are investing more capital in developing workforce skills and capabilities. So, a confident workforce of lifelong learners requires support through the whole career trajectory. And in Canada, we tend to rely on publicly funded skills development systems like our education system, like our public employment services. And that, together with the fact that we're not seeing enough investment from employers in their own workforce, leaves a gap. So, what can we do? Well, this is a moment to look differently at how we can support Canadians to maintain their skills. And we hope this conversation will provide that springboard today. So, to get us ready for our two presentations, I would like to welcome Alex Stevens and Andrew Parkin. So, to share a little bit about Alex, Alex is the Associate Director of Research and Evaluation at the Future Skills Center. Alex's work over the past 20 years has specialized in education, training, and labor market development issues through contributions in managing Canadian and international cooperation initiatives and overseeing research and evaluation programs. He headed up the Canadian Council on Learning's Work and Learning Knowledge Centre and the Centre for Workplace Skills. He joined Colleges and Institutes Canada in 2013, where he served as its in-country program lead in Mozambique, and he has consulted on numerous international programs while living in Bolivia with his family. And returning to Canada in 2022, he joined the Future Skills Centre. So it's great to have you in today's conversation, Alex. Next, I'm going to share about Andrew. Andrew is the executive director of the Environics Institute. His career has been driven by a commitment to bringing diverse interests together, mobilizing evidence to inform decision-making and deliberation, and bridging the gap between policy research and dialogue. Andrew has previously held a variety of senior positions, including Director of the Mowat Centre, Director General of the Council of Ministers of Education Canada, CMEC, Associate Executive Director and Director of Research and Program Development at the Canadian Millennium Scholarship Foundation, and co-director for the Centre for Research and Information on Canada. A political sociologist by background, he has completed his postdoc at Dalhousie, his PhD from the University of Bradford, and his BA at Queen's. He has received several academic honors and has co-authored and authored numerous publications on Canadian public policy. Welcome, Andrew. And I will hand it over to Alex for his presentation.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je m'appelle Alex Stevens, je suis le directeur adjoint de recherche et évaluation ici au Centre des compétences futures. Et ça me fait plaisir de pouvoir vous adresser la parole cet après-midi. I will be doing my presentation in English, but can certainly answer questions in French as well for our French-speaking colleagues here. So I have the pleasure to present some research that the Future Skills Center commissioned last year on the topic of employer-sponsored skills training in Canada. And I'm going to give a sort of a 10-minute overview of that research. I would encourage you to go to our website for the full piece of research, the report that we published last year. There's our website address at the bottom, and you can see that the two authors are Daniel Monroe and Craig Lamb from Shift Insights. They were the ones who put this very good and very insightful and in-depth piece of research together for us, and it contains a lot of information, only a bit of which I can hope to sort of convey to you over the next 10 minutes. Why did the FSC commission this piece of research? Well, we've known for a long time that there appears to be underinvestment by employers in skills training in Canada. It's been an enduring challenge for Canada, and we're not always sure about what the causes are. And part of that problem is due to the quality of the data we have about this issue. And I'll talk about that at the end of my presentation. But we did want to know, we do know that Canada's employer investment, the rates of employer investment training, the level of employer investment training tends to lag OECD countries, or it has in the past. So we wanted to know, is that changing? Is there data that's available to let us know if that's changing? Why is this important? Well, we know that we know that this is one factor that's potentially contributing to slow productivity growth in Canada and can constrain local and regional economic development, and also even equity, diversity, and inclusion in the labor market. So we wanted to update our picture and assess the most recent available data. And then we also asked ourselves, is this issue becoming more important? Is the issue of underinvestment in training becoming more important now than it was in the past? And a couple of things suggest that it is. The first of them, obviously, is the increasing pace of technological change. We're in the midst of a technological revolution right now. But also with artificial intelligence, but more generally, automation and digitization are pushing firms to modernize, to adopt new technologies more quickly, and therefore the need to skill up and invest in skills and to deliver skills training more quickly is increasing. And then other national and global forces, such as the transition to a net zero economy, we feel are going to increase the pace of change that companies are going to have to put up with. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of some of what we found. There's a lot more detail, like I said, in the report. In terms of the information that we've been looking at, the report is pulling data from a number of different sources. So from numerous surveys and studies done by StatsCan, some by industrial sector council groups, some by employer organizations, business organizations, and researchers as well. And they all vary in sort of their focus and the kinds of questions that they answer and the specific sectors that they look at. So there is a bit of what our authors of this report called a maple mismatch in terms of the available data that we have here. But we do see some things that are coming out of that. One of the things for sure is we don't have a very clear idea of what the average or median employer investment in training is in Canada. We've got numerous different sources which give us a range of values, all of which put us below what our international peers are. So OECD countries, we tend to be below the average for that level of investment. Now, the data on this isn't perfect. It's somewhat recent, and but it is based on somewhat smaller sample sizes. But it does appear that employer spending on skills training has declined over the past 2 decades. And that's an issue of concern because over that same period of time, we've seen slowing productivity growth in Canada and more pressures on the labor market and our skills development systems to deliver skills and to deliver them more quickly. We know that training investment is concentrated in large firms. It's concentrated in certain sectors, and that certain regions of the country and certain provinces are spending more per worker on training than others. So there are important regional disparities for which we don't entirely have full explanations. Some of it is potentially led by or caused by differences in public policy, such as in Quebec, where there's a more structured fiscal approach to driving employer investment in training, but that's only part of the picture. In terms of the focus of training, it tends to be very focused on immediate needs, on onboarding people, on skills for technology adoption, looking at specific skills gaps. And a lot of it is also related to complying with regulatory requirements. We know that employers prefer by far on-the-job, in the workplace modes of delivery. This is particularly true for small and medium-sized enterprises, where their ability to send people off presents large opportunity costs for doing work and for doing work-related learning and training outside of the workplace. And then we know, and we've known this for some time, that training is inequitably distributed. So those with higher education, those in sort of their prime working years, those in technology-focused roles, those who are full-time permanent employees, all receive more training support from employers than other categories of workers. And we know that this affects certain underrepresented groups negatively. It creates differences in inequities of access and labor market outcomes or outcomes in workplaces for them. So it is an issue that we at the Future Skills Center want to continue to keep tracking. So So that's so I've only given a very quick update, really. Can only provide a quick update of some of the major top headline findings from this research. But one of the big stories that's coming out of the work that our authors did on this report is about the quality of the data that we get coming out of these studies and out of the report that provided sort of an overall assessment. So by and large, the data that we have might be reliable, but a lot of it is quite out of date. A lot of the research instruments and studies and surveys that have been fielded have been discontinued. Some of them are one-offs. Some of them are very focused on particular sectors. So we do have somewhat of a mishmash or a sort of a collage of different data sources that we're trying to do our best to sort of triangulate to get the best data possible. But it is true that some of the major surveys that we have that's providing us critical information are out of date, and or very focused in a particular way that it's hard to make general conclusions about what's going on in Canada at large. Some of them are based on very small sample sizes, and some recent ones have good data and well done data, but again, the sample sizes are small, and some of them are skewed towards large firms rather than looking at all firms and specifically and particularly small and medium-sized enterprises. So these are all major challenges that we're facing in terms of the data, in terms of the quality of the data that we get. So what does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with a picture of training that is sort of that can be approximated. We can generate that picture of what training looks like, of what employer-sponsored training looks like in Canada. But the picture is grainy and it comes with certain caveats and qualifications. Without ongoing robust data collection with consistent questions, we will not be able to assess whether policy interventions are having an impact. So why does all this matter then? Well, like I said at the beginning, we believe that the pace of technological change and other types of change will put ever greater pressure on labor markets to develop workforce skills at higher levels and much more quickly. To make progress on greater labor market equity, diversity, inclusion, we also need to take a look at how we fund skills training and what role employers are playing in promoting through investment in training. And from a public policy perspective, finally, we should at least be asking about whether there's a role for the public sector to either be a catalyst for investment in training or whether ongoing sustaining investment is necessary. And if so, what are the policy levers for doing that? And it's hard to entertain all these questions if the data isn't great, and if it isn't up to date, and if it doesn't allow us to dig down into the details that we need about firm sizes, about sectors, about particular groups that are getting training. So part of our role here at FSE is to hopefully raise some awareness about the information and data gaps that we have, to take stock of how our ability to plan is constrained by this lack of data, and to work collaboratively across sectors and silos to begin addressing this issue. So it's not just government that needs to be involved in this conversation. We think employers need to be involved in this conversation. The skills ecosystem needs to be involved in this, labor unions, post-secondary education system, and others as well. So I hope I've given you a good overview of this piece of research that we've done. And it's available on our website, and I'll be happy to answer questions after the next speaker speaks. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Alex, for that great overview of the state of employer-sponsored training. And a friendly reminder to all folks listening in, please feel free to submit your questions to the Q&A. We're more than happy to take them. And next, I will invite Andrew.
Hi, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Tout comme Alex, je vais faire ma présentation en anglais, mais je pourrais répondre ou poursuivre la discussion en français. So I am going to just show some of the more recent findings from our survey on employment and skills, which we have been carrying out now for several years with our partners at the Future Skills Center and at the Diversity Institute. So I'd like to thank them for their support of the project, and the Government of Canada, which is also contributing the funding through the Future Skills program to this project. I'm not going to talk a lot about how we did the survey unless people want to get into that. There's details in all of the reports and on the website. But it's not a survey of firms. This is a survey of the adult Canadian population, a representative sample. And we started it in early 2020 and thought we were going to do one study of how Canadians were perceiving the technological change that were occurring around them. But we ended up in the field in March of 2020. And so suddenly we realized we had our first survey about the impact of COVID on the workplace. And given all the changes that unleashed, we then decided to keep proceeding with the project. And in total now we've conducted 6 waves of the survey. So the survey has focused on a number of issues, but one of the key areas that it gets into is workers' experiences with skills training, and that's what I'll show just a little bit of today. So we'll just start with the information about the proportion of workers at a given moment of time that tend to access training to improve their skills. The way we asked about this in terms of time changed because at a certain point in the pandemic, it made sense to collect information about that kind of more immediate experience. When we started in 2020, about 1 in 2 Canadian workers were saying that they had accessed some form of skills training provided by their employer over the previous 5 years. Not surprisingly, once we got into the pandemic, that dipped down a little bit to closer to 1 in 3 who had it sort of in the more recent period of time. But as you can see, as we get into 2023, that starts picking up again. So we're almost back at 1 in 2 Canadian workers that has had some kind of skills training in the recent past. We've asked about different forms of training. Obviously, you can see that it's more likely that people will get training that if it's provided by their employer, but workers also undertake their own training, including if they're out of work and need to access some kind of training to get back into employment. We then asked what type of training people have undertaken when they talk about accessing training to improve their skills. So among those who say they've had some form of training, you can see that by far the most common type of training has to do with workplace health and safety, which of course makes perfect sense. In a number of jobs, there's procedures that people need to understand and protocols they need to follow in order to keep themselves and everyone that they work with and the clients they serve safe and healthy. But that's, of course, a particular way of thinking about training and is not always what we have in mind when we think about skills improvement, upskilling, preparing for technological change, and so on. Other forms of training are certainly present, but less common. I won't go through them all, but you can see that underneath health and safety, then there's training around use of computer software or hardware. Then we get to leadership training, communications training, updating your qualifications, and so on. And then much less common, interesting, for instance, that adapting to working at home or selling products online, while that was definitely important during the pandemic, didn't kind of displace or take over other forms of training necessarily for everyone. We also asked not so much about how people would describe the skills training they received, but what was the reason that they undertook it in the first place? What was the motivation? And here we can see the evenly divided. The top 2 answers here are just people's desire to keep improving themselves, to advance their career, but also that some training was mandatory. That reason they undertook the training essentially is because they had to. Some people are motivated just by a desire to have new experiences, to learn new things, adapt to technology, and so on. And again, here, by the time we're asking the question at the end of 2023, the pandemic has really started to recede in importance. So that's not really a motivator here. So we're split between the general kind of self-motivated reasons of positioning yourself for success in the workforce, and reasons to do with employers who make that training a requirement. But new in the, this is the most recent wave of the survey, which is at the end of 2023. So a new question we added was not what was the reason you took training, but more directly, who paid for it, or how much was paid for the training. And that included a response that the worker themselves did not pay anything for it because someone else paid for it, most likely the employer or someone else paid for it. So this is the same data in two charts. This one, the one on the left, has a little more detail, but the pie chart is probably a little bit easier to give an overview of. So about 2 in 5 workers in Canada who are undertaking skills training are not paying for that. So most likely their employer is paying for it. And then a little bit over half are paying something. In some cases, it's what we could maybe call a nominal amount of $100 or less. But of course, it goes all the way up to several $1,000s or even more for certain types of training. So significant, or more than a significant, obviously, the preponderance of people who are taking training in Canada are paying for that training themselves, either with a small amount or with a much more significant investment on their part. And then the likelihood that someone has to pay for the training themselves is related to the type of training, or I'm going to show it here on this slide the other way around. The likelihood that your employer is paying for the training depends again on the type of training. So very general, a general kind of skills refresh, or again, the health and safety training related to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and so on. Those are the most likely types to be paid for by employers. So I think it's notable that some of the other types of training that we could think of as being important to position someone for a transition to a more senior position, or a position with more of a intensive skills requirement. So management and leadership training, for instance, or communications training, those are less likely to be paid for by the employer. So the other way of putting that is that if a worker wants to access that type of skills training, they're much more likely to have to pay for it themselves. And then the other new question we added in the most recent wave of the survey had to do with the outcomes of skills training. Now, we had previously asked very general questions around whether workers found their training to be helpful for them. And we did find very positive responses. So essentially, a majority of Canadian workers who undertake training will say that they appreciated the training, found the training helpful, and so on. But this was a much more direct question of whether the training they took resulted in a number of things. Either an increase in their salary or their wage, or a promotion, or an opportunity to switch to a better job, earning a specific kind of credential, finding a job after being unemployed, and then just a general kind of sense of personal improvement. So you can see the results here. So what these numbers show is, 29% of Canadian workers who undertook training in the last 12 months said it helped them get more pay for the work they were doing. For instance, 21% say it got them a promotion. Much higher proportion just felt it improved themselves. And a significant a proportion here who are associated with a specific credential. We don't know whether that is micro credential, professional certification, qualification, and so on. We don't know exactly what that is, but a notable number who are reporting back that it leads to a specific credential. But there's a couple of important qualifications or caveats or further breakdowns about this information about these results of skills training. The first is that there are some significant differences among different types of workers about the likelihood of getting these outcomes. And the first one I'll show you here is just a fairly important gender difference here. So men who undertake training are much more likely to say it leads to a salary increase, and even a bit more likely to say it leads to a promotion or a better job than are women. Further research that a colleague of mine has just undertaken with this data for the Future Skills Center and Diversity Institute has tied that even more directly to women who have younger children. And so I think that's a concern about the sort of equitable, not just access to training, but the type of training that can lead to those very positive outcomes. And then a final point here around the link between these outcomes and who pays for the training. And what you can see here is that if the employee themselves pay for the training, they're much more likely to get these concrete outcomes of better pay, better job, opportunities for promotion, and so on, than if the employer paid for the training. That again could be related a little bit to the type of training. So you remember we saw earlier that the most likely type of training to be paid for by employers is health and safety in the workplace. It's a very important type of training, but probably less likely to lead to this sort of transition to a better type of job than are some of the other types of trainings which employees themselves, workers themselves, are more likely to have to pay for. And then finally, that also has an equity dimension. So we had seen right away in the research that some groups are more likely to access training. For instance, racialized workers are actually more likely to access training than are non-racialized workers in Canada. But now we can see more specifically that's because racialized workers are specifically more likely to undertake training that they pay for themselves. They are no more likely to undertake training that employers are paying for. So workers who might be facing disadvantages or barriers related to discrimination and other issues in the workplace may be preparing themselves to confront and get past those, but they're doing that more on their own initiative. And this pattern here, I don't show all the data here, but we can see it with the difference between immigrants and non-immigrants, or Indigenous workers and non-Indigenous workers, and so on. So there's a real, I think, question mark that comes up not only about the proportion of training that employers are paying for, but whether they're using those dollars, those training dollars, to help address equity issues in the workplace, or whether that responsibility ends up falling on the shoulders of workers themselves. So that's an overview of the information I have, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Those were really compelling findings, and definitely some great questions in the Q&A coming up around that, so lots of food for thought. I would like to thank Alex and Andrew for these very informative and helpful presentations, and would like to pass the conversation over to Tricia Williams from the Future Skills Center to continue the panel portion of our conversation.
Thank you so much, Elise, and it's wonderful to be here. And I'm seriously going through these Q&As, and I just love seeing all the questions come in. So it's wonderful to have the audience engagement. And clearly there is a hunger to understand what is happening with skills training and what we're investing in or not investing in as a country. And this was a really helpful overview to the picture that's happening right now, and what we can make of it, as Alex said, even given the data shortages. And it's really helpful for Andrew that you pointed out some of the things that people are self-reporting about what they're going into. So now we're going to bring it down to some kind of practical brass tacks, like how is this shaping out in workplaces, in universities, and training institutions? What does that look like? And we are really thrilled to have two of our partners of the Future Skills Centers here to have that conversation with us. After that, we're going to try to get to some of the questions. In the meantime, I think Andrew and Alex are going to try to answer some in the chat, and we'll bring them back as well to answer some of these questions, especially some of the hot topics that are kind of coming through. But hopefully, I think some of the themes that have been raised in the Q&A we're going to get at through the conversations with JP and Ish. So first, maybe I think I'm starting with JP. Hopefully I have that right. So we'll start with JP. So Jean-Pierre Giroux is the president of the Excellence in Manufacturing Consortium. JP, I've been on many panels with you, and there's a really long, impressive bio here that I don't think I'm going to read, because I think I'll let you maybe instead tell us first, maybe start out with telling us a little bit about yourself and EMC, and any opening remarks you want to make about this before I ask you a couple questions about what you're seeing in terms of employer-sponsored skills training.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tricia. Nice to see you. Bonjour tout le monde. Je suis Jean-Pierre Giroux, président de Excellence in Manufacturing Consortium. We're an industry-led group. We're operating across Canada in the manufacturing sector. So in the EMC was built by manufacturers for manufacturers, and we're constantly waking up every morning and looking at addressing industry needs. So I've been myself personally following this file of financing, training, and the level of investment and how to engage employers, I would say, for the last 20 years. So it is a special situation in Canada. And I just want to add my 2 cents on the opening remarks. Yes, we are behind when we start comparing ourselves with the US or the European country. However, let's not forget that we're a world, especially in manufacturing of small and medium-sized businesses. If you look at the US market, it's large-size employer, like mainly, primarily large-size employers. So that creates another level of complexity for addressing the needs and mobilizing employers. So we also know, and this is very important for this conversation, that small and medium-sized enterprise will invest, and sometimes more than large-size employer, when they see relevant training, when they see addressing their needs, specific needs to their context that they're living, and when it's strategic for them. And it brings back to we often see training as an activity, but it has to be strategic, especially for a small, because in our case, you have to release employee. So releasing, one thing is to invest, but another thing is you have to release the employee, because if you don't have someone, especially in the manufacturing floor, you have to replace that individual. So that creates another level of investment altogether. So I'll stop it there, and I'm very pleased to be part of this panel. Tricia, over to you.
Thanks so much, JP. And I want to come back to you and probe more about some of the questions coming out, especially from the audience, about employer investment. But maybe first I'll introduce our other panelist, Dr. Ishwar Singh from McMaster University. And Ish, do you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about the department and the program that you're part of with McMaster?
Okay, thank you, Tricia. Thank you for inviting me to this wonderful webinar, and I'm really very pleased to be here. So my name is Ishwar Singh. Everybody calls me Ish, even my students and everybody else. So, I am an adjunct faculty member at McMaster University in the School of Engineering Practice and Technology, which is a arm in the engineering division of McMaster University. So one is the applied section, and we are the practice department of the engineering. That's where we are focused. So we have 7 undergraduate programs that are focused for serving the industry: automation, automotive engineering technology, IT, biotechnology, and then we have degree completion program, which is for students who are working in industry, and they can take those programs in the evening while working to get their degree, so they can get promotions in their workplace and enhance their skills, which is a very unique form of program. And it's a cooperation between Mohawk and McMaster that we formed, this so-called the Bachelor of Technology Partnership. And that's really a huge success. It's only probably one program in the whole province that works on the basis of giving opportunities to graduates of colleges who want to get their university degree and can continue to work while taking their degree. So that's one aspect. So we have three undergraduate programs in automation, automotive engineering, and biotechnology. Those are 4-year program with a co-op model built into them. Then we have 7 Masters of Engineering program that are, one is the systems and technology, one is manufacturing, design, entrepreneurship, policy, and biotechnology, and manufacturing, I mentioned though. So we have 7 undergrad and 7 graduate programs, and they're all oriented towards working with industry and supplying the workforce for the industry, because it's an applied department that we have. So my role has been, I was involved in setting up the Bachelor of Technology Automation program at Mohawk, and then we formed a partnership at McMaster, and then ever since then, the whole program has grown and so on. So lately, then I've been involved establishing a learning factory at McMaster University, which is one of in the School of Engineering Practice and Technology. The idea of this learning factory was to create a facility where we simulate what the students will be doing in industry. And our goal was to have a whole setup for demonstrating Industry 4.0 technologies, so that students can learn about what are the skills they need to implement when they leave McMaster University and so on. So that learning factory is working very well. Now there's another colleague of mine who has taken over and building on that one. And then after that, following, I've been involved in this Future Skills Foundation project on implementation of smart system and digital technologies in the workplace by using the work integrated learning experiences. And that's what I'm here to answer questions and so on. So
lots going on. Amazing. I mean, we know that there's lots of programs and initiatives happening across the higher ed system. So I think we're interested in digging into that with you a little bit more. But first, I want to go back to you, JP, and really pleased to have you both here and to really hone in on some of the questions coming through. You heard a lot about, we're concerned about the lower levels of investment, but you point out, JP, that employers have to see value. There's some questions coming out in terms of, micro credentials. Is it around? And I know, JP, this has been a big focus of what the Future Skills Center and EMC have been doing in partnership with some other sector councils as well, is looking at what needs to happen to make, training attractive or modular or bite-sized or very attuned to industry needs. So what are your perspectives on that? And what have you learned over the last couple of years in working on these issues and with your employer members?
So as you pointed out, there's a lot of micro-credential is a very popular theme right now. There's investment happening. Provinces are building their own framework. As at EMC, we started with the premise of these micro-credential, they will be as good as the industry recognize them. And let's not repeat the same mistake that we have been doing in the last 30 years. Let's have employers involved at every level of the development, the design, the development, the measurement, and the impact of these micro-credential. So what we have done is we teamed up with the Future Skills. They asked us to bring more partners at the table. We came up with a framework or a model where 5 sectorial group, they're all relevant to the manufacturing sector, to agree on a methodology. So let's figure out how to develop and implement, deploy, obviously, and measure. The validation is at the critical piece of the experience here with 5 sectorial organization at the table. So that was very successful to establish that model, which would be like competency based. We've done some pilot too. These pilot implicated obviously hundreds of employers. There was in total close to 1,000 of learner being part of it from coast to coast in the sectors of IT, biotech, aerospace, manufacturing, agriculture, and food processing. So they're developing these micro-credential, which they are short by nature. They are narrow by attacking or targeting competencies, very specific competencies, and they have to be validated. So has to be a form of assessment, which really validate that this micro-credential will actually advance the position of an employer on the area of skills and competency in their business. So that's the tricky part here, to do this in a very rapid fashion. So we've done this in using topics like problem solving to put some perspective, numeracy. There was some biotech. There was also IT components like big data, cloud-based training, and we learned tons because there was some consultation upfront with the employer for designing these micro-credential. We learned also how important it is on the delivery side. Like I mentioned, they have to be flexible. They have to be deployed in a way that it's not disturbing the employer business flow, and most importantly, they have to be measured and they have to be directly linked to the business of the company. So there's key findings that I can come back at, but that was the biggest learning exercise. That's the first phase, and now we're working into a second phase, create a marketplace where collaboration will happen with post-secondary institution and sectorial group.
I mean, I love how you bring that in and say that, you know, we need the post-secondaries involved. We can't do this alone, right? And I think so much of what we're talking here is about labor supply and labor demand. Bring it back to Econ 101, right? And having those and making sure that we're not like having employers over here and education training providers over here, but bringing them together in a very real way. And I know EMC has been such a leader in advancing kind of the thinking and the practice of that. Ish, I want to turn to you and take that from your perspective. I mean, having, you know, as you said, you're in a school of practice. You're very much thinking about the practical skills that your students can gain. How are you engaging employers? And I mean, not the mechanisms, like we know there's committees and, you know, universities do these things, but how do you feel like employers are really bought into that? Do they really buy into engaging with students, engaging with the university? And how can we engage employers more in the practice of developing programs or training students? What are your thoughts on that?
Good question. How we, first of all, let me share something. When we are at Mohawk College, for every program, we used to have industrial advisory committee. So industrial advisory committee was...
There's always a committee, right? That's good.
So that committee will advise me as a chair of the program, what type of students they will employ, what type of skills they need. So we will design the curriculum to make sure that it has an input from the employers and the students are ready for employment the day graduate. In fact, so that model in the colleges has been very successful. And the same thing in the university, our programs, the undergraduate degrees that we have the industrial advisory committees for each program to give the direction for the curriculum as well as prepare the students for the future. Now, to engage the employers, we have the co-op program. So there are two types of co-op programs that I should mention. One is the co-op, will co-op at the workplace, the will learning at campus. So those are two slightly different models. So I will go into each of them and see how they have helped us engaging with more industry and so on. So if I look at the traditional, the co-op model at the workplace, so where in our undergraduate program as well as graduate program, we have opportunity, the students have opportunity to go for co-op for 4 months, 8 months, 12 months, or 16 months. Then on the graduate side, we started without the co-op, but the industry needed more help, so we introduced co-op model there as well, co-op at the workplace. So which is the WIL model for the co-op. And then we introduced the WIL model at the campus, which is with the Masters of Engineering program. Now that is a program where we create we reach out to the employers, co-op employers, the SMEs, the hospitals, municipalities, and we invite them, create a network. We create a network by going through the various websites. So we have a huge database, and we connect with the industry, and we let them know what programs are available, and particularly the WIL program on the campus. How does that work, and so on. So we have enhanced our outreach to the industry as well as SMEs, as I mentioned, new technology startup, and so on and so forth, to get them involved in all aspects. So at McMaster University, we have a annual manufacturing show, MMRI, at the McMaster Innovation Center, and we invite folks from industry to come there, and at that we also provide an opportunity to look at our undergraduate, graduate programs, and then provide them opportunity to get connected with the university, faculty at different level, at the department level, at the university level, and so on. So that provides us two-way communication processes. So reaching out to the employers, come to the campus, look at our labs, look at our learning factory, let us know what your challenges are and see what we can do to help them. I also just want to mention that in addition to those undergrad and grad programs, we also have micro-credentials in the School of Engineering Practice Technology that we have just started a couple of years ago. And again, the intention of exactly the way John Perrier mentioned about getting in touch with industry and get the industry involved in developing the micro-credentials as well as the delivering it. So we are using all of the models that are really important for supporting the workforce needs of various industries and organizations.
Oh, that's fabulous. And I think as you're describing these different initiatives, I'm thinking it's no one thing, right? It's no one thing for a training organization, a college, a university, or even a community organization to build connections with employers. It's going to be multifaceted and building linkages across those and thinking about their needs and their incentives. I want to turn to that, JP, because one of the projects, so we've done two big projects together in addition to lots of panels. We've done a really interesting initiative where we were testing what does it take to have employers put some skin in the game and actually like commit some funds and resources to training. And I think we heard from Andrew and Alex about some of the data landscape, about what's involved. And I think it's one of the things that I took away when I read that report. Very intense, very detailed report with lots of data points for any research policy nerds out there. I'm sure Anna Maria is going to drop the link in the chat. There's so much that it's so difficult or just touchy to get it right. What are the ingredients to make sure that we're addressing those value questions for employer, to get them put more skin in the game? So obviously we were testing that together. I'm curious what you took away from that at EMC in terms of, how do we encourage employers to put skin in the game? We obviously heard about why we think that matters for the coming decades. And then what do you think we need to do to do more of that? In the Q&A, people are asking about the Canada training benefit. What are are there kind of policy pathways or what are the kind of things that you see as part of addressing the solution to having employers be more committed to resource-wise in terms of training? Sorry, that's a big question. I asked all the things on my mind.
It's a really good question because it speaks to a mindset and a shift in how we do things. We've got to move away from crystal ball moment and guessing what the industry want. And the only way to do this is to be committed to understand where are their needs, like good old needs assessment, and where is everything going, like the forecast of skills for employers. And at the center of this is to have the employer being part of the process. And what I just said is not easy. It's a commitment. It's a commitment. It's a mindset. It's an ongoing commitment and an investment to do this. Not with all the respect of the world. And I've seen the advisory committee with the university and the college. They do this once a year or twice a year. It has to be ongoing to follow the development of the skills and the sector. Like in manufacturing, we're seeing huge changes. Like with new technology coming in, the jobs are changing. The technology is constantly changing. So how do we go about addressing the needs and the skills? You have to be connected. This is not going to happen if you have no connection. So at the center of this, it has to be also getting into how relevant, how you get an employer engaged into a training program is by contextualizing your training, really, and having something for the employer. Because you see, we hear a lot, and I have to make that distinction. We talk a lot about formal training, where you go to school and you get a diploma. If we're talking here, we're talking about workplace training and the huge role of the employer to play. Like there's a responsibility much more than it used to be, because before we used to wait. Now we're talking about everybody heard about the the demand-driven economy, and we want the employer to be at the forefront of it. But that's exactly what I'm talking about here. Like, it's having the employer involved in the decision making of the training direction. That's a different mindset, and contextualizing it in a way that makes sense for them. So I'll give you some example. In our world, it has to be around production. Like if there's delays in production, if there's issues, getting the widget out, that's a problem. So how do you train, and whether it's prevention, whether it's maintenance, whether it's meeting quotas, whether it's streamlining, lean manufacturing, green manufacturing, that has to be done with the employer. It cannot be think in a bubble outside having any input from the employer. And it's the same thing for advanced manufacturing. Like, if you want to take on advanced manufacturing, you have to build the capacity in manufacturing. The problem we have is everybody wants advanced manufacturing and new technology, but we don't have the capacity, the internal capacity to take on these projects. So there has to be some real training on how to project manage technology project, for instance. That's a big one. That's a big conversation. So these are some of the examples. So what's the carrot? Like, what's in it for an employer? It has to be driven by end results. And I'm saying ROI. Yes, ROI is great when it comes to financial, but it's much more than ROI. It speaks to engagement of your workforce. It speaks to solving issues in your workplace that could actually make you more competitive. And also what we're working with our members is to constantly measure that business impact in the impact of the training that has on the company. So it's a real balance between what's in it for the employer, what's in it for the employee or the learner, but not just focusing on one or the other.
Oh, such a wealth of knowledge in there. And I want to pick on a thread a little bit with you first, JP, before going to Ish around, one of the questions that came in the Q&A was around innovation. And I think what you're starting to point there, JP, is yes, there's a workforce engagement issue. And we saw that, with Andrew, with kind of like why people want to invested or why people want to do training, because it takes a mindset also on the part of an individual to say, yes, I'm going to go do training. I'm going to learn to do things differently. That's an individual mindset as well as a business mindset, right? To say that we need that at all levels. And that's when we talk about lifelong learning, what that means at multiple levels. But I'm curious what you see in terms of innovation or productivity. You know, the Bank of Canada has been sounding the alarm around labor productivity. Do we have any, and this is some things that we're doing some research on with our partners at the conference board right now, because we intuitively, I think we understand that investing in skills can help our productivity, it can help our innovation, it can help drive that business growth. But to what extent do we see that in practice, or do we just not have the data? We don't have the empirical proof. But is this something that you feel like your members at EMC are intuitively getting, or is it still kind of an open question?
It's a really good one, because productivity has always been at the center of the manufacturing sector, for sure. We live and breathe of innovation. To isolate it and to say exactly where it stands, it's a difficult subject altogether. But I could tell you, and we see this, and this is what we are on a mission at EMC. We want to hit mainstream. You see, too often, and we're seeing in our own learning center, we keep training the same company. Okay, I'm kind of opening up like the early adopters, the 15%, that are very progressive, that are doing very well, and who have a mindset. Where it's a national challenge is, how do we get to the other 80%? The ones that don't have time, they're firefighters, they're trying to survive. But if we approach them the right way, because talking here about small and medium-sized businesses, rarely you have to go directly at the CEO level, and that's where we make a commitment to bring that conversation. See, this has been a challenge for the training folks out there, and the HR folks, is its training has not been elevated at the top level. Now we're realizing that people is at the center of everything we're doing, and when we're seeing it in manufacturing, where the number one issue in manufacturing for competitiveness is labor shortages. Like, I mean, people have predicted this 10 years ago, 15 years ago. We were talking about this. Now it's happening, and at the center also of it, it's how to innovate and to modernize the facility that we have. So I think, for me, innovation, yes, it is happening at every level, and it doesn't have to be 4.0, or we're talking about 2.0, and in some cases we're talking about 1.0, and that's at all level. But it's the ability for groups like us, like McMaster University, which we do tons of business with, to be able to come in with a common language, simplify the process, and bring that message at the C level. I think that's a commitment that needs to happen on an ongoing basis.
Wonderful. Ish, I'm gonna ask you a similar question. So I'm sure that you feel like you are setting your students up to be like leaders in innovation. What can you point to, or what do you think of in terms of the ability of those students or employers' participation in these programs to help drive innovation, to help drive productivity, so they see the value of engaging in that? How are you thinking about these issues? Oh, gotta unmute. I do it all the time.
Sorry.
It's okay.
So that has been our driving force, because I personally, as a faculty member, find out what the industry needs. What do they really need? And let me give you an example, and then see how our journey has gone on to support the industry. When I was at Mohawk College, there was an OPC technology. John Pierre might remember. OPC technology is a very important element of connecting the plant floor data to the internet. Now, at that time, years ago, nobody knew about that terminology except for a few industries, the one. So I went out to them. I said, "What do you need?" And she said, "We need students to know about this technology." That started the concept of. So what we did was we had a meeting of industrial partners from the local Hamilton area. We invited them to Mohawk College. We asked them, "What are your needs?" And then we presented to them, "This is the type of program we're going to develop that will meet your needs." So we always have been involved in getting all of industry involvement in getting all the programs development and so on. So as far as the innovation is concerned, because the university, we also have researchers like Dr. Mo El-Bastawi, who is the 3D, guru, and also manufacturing. He was the dean and vice president of research and so on. So innovation has been a part of McMaster University. And then this BTech partnership and the School of Engineering Practice Technology, the MN courses, they're all designed to teach the innovative technology to the student so they can move out either in the co-op format or in the work integrated learning projects at the campus, that the moment they graduate, they are ready to start working on. So let me give you an example. Tesla has been coming to our campus, taking our automation students away from here. And sometimes I will joke with the student, "Guy, why don't you stay here? We need you." So most of our students get employment when they are hired by the co-op, because co-op student brings in new technology to the working place. The employers see the value they bring it. They offer them jobs so that they can stay on. So a lot of students, they get jobs even before they graduate. So this is because of the curriculum. One of the emphasis I want to emphasize, sometimes this part is ignored. What do we teach? What are the technology that we're teaching? Do we teach them what industry needs, or do we teach them the old technologies based on somebody else said that you should be teaching them this and that? So it's all based on the innovation that, and faculty, as a faculty, we try to keep up with what's new, what's coming. For example, now, AI, everybody is talking about AI, and federal government is investing a huge amount, as we all saw that. So we already, once we started this FSC project, we were aware of it. We taught AI when I was Mohawk College, and we said we're going to have more courses. So now, as a part of the system technology and manufacturing courses, we have about 5 or 6 AI courses for the student to help them get, again, a leadership role. So now our program, so essentially we are combining the Industry 4.0 skills like IoT, IIoT, robotics, and so on, and then AI. So by combining, so we are actually preparing our students for Industry 4.0 AI, which is essentially going to be so-called Industry 5.0. And in my experience, first of all, we have a lot of SMEs. So first of all, I'll ask them, what is it that you want? If you need, first of all, what level of technology have you implemented? Are you at the first level or second level, third level? And then I engage them in conversation. Where do you want to go? And we can help you with the adoption of various technology. For example, there's a maturity index, Industry 4.0 maturity index. So I will use that as a criteria to see where you are in your industry, what you are applying, and what is your need. And to be able to go there, we are essentially developed a skill testing questionnaire that we can give it to employees and see what level they are, and then we can provide them training to go to the level that the company wants, and so on. And if they don't, because of the time constraints, not all of the technology can be transferred immediately to the current employee. So I think there's a definitely need for the new generation of students who are coming out with the new technology so they can implement it and then help the industry as well as gainful employment and so on. So those are the ways that we definitely want to promote more and more. I think more of such programs can definitely help Canadian manufacturers to have labor force that's needed.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go back to JP for one last question before I want to ask Andrew and Alex to come back, because there's a couple really important questions, I think, that I would like to bring them into, especially when it comes to some of the equity issues when we're talking about skills training. But JP, there's a question here, and I'm going to read it in French. Apologies, I know it's fine for JP. Apologies for my accent. Vous parlez beaucoup de formation formelle, technique, académique. Est-ce que vous avez regardé les besoins des compétences pour réussir avec les employeurs, c'est-à-dire les compétences comme soft skills? Est-ce que vous pouvez parler un peu, Jean-Pierre, de les compétences soft skills et les autres compétences que les employeurs doivent considérer?
Oui, certainement. Puis je vais répondre en français, Tricia. Ici, on parle des compétences de base. Dans le secteur manufacturier, on a les compétences d'employabilité. Ça, c'est pour intégrer le marché du travail. Ensuite, ce qu'on appelle, nous, les compétences de base, ou on peut les appeler les compétences essentielles. Et ici, on parle de la communication, de la collaboration. On peut rentrer dans la résolution de problèmes, l'adaptabilité au marché du travail. Et oui, elles sont essentielles et on voit, je veux dire, massivement des investissements dans ce sens-là dans le secteur. Je vais vous donner des exemples. Chez EMC, on a créé une certification qui s'appelle le Manufacturing Essential Certification, qui est littéralement basée sur le modèle de ESDC, qui est le Skills for Success, qui identifie les 9 compétences essentielles au Canada, mais dans un contexte, la manière qu'on a emballé ces formations-là, on a intégré un projet qui vise à régler un véritable problème en milieu de travail. Donc, lorsque les apprenants sont exposés à ces compétences essentielles-là, ils doivent résoudre un problème en milieu de travail qui permet à avancer la situation, que ça peut être un processus de communication, ça peut être un enjeu relié par exemple, à l'élimination des déchets ou du waste, là, comme qu'on appelle. Ça peut être relié à la satisfaction à la clientèle. Ça peut être lié à des communications interdépartementales et autres. Donc, oui, absolument. Encore une fois, c'est comment est-ce qu'on présente ces parcours d'apprentissage-là. Le fameux packaging, c'est how you package your training and how you actually present something that means something to an employer, that will actually directly touch an employer to say, okay, this is great. I'm going to send 5 of my supervisors, because they do need to work on their soft skills, compétences de base. But at the end of this process, I know I will get some form of results. And that's the famous, and we talk about it, it's the job transfer, like how you actually design training for application of the learning in the workplace, which will drive results, will drive return for an employer to invest. And I think that's the conversation when we talk about investment and we talk about how relevant the training has to be. It has to be tangible from that perspective. And it has to be geared towards the advancement of the company, not only the employer and the learner. The learner has to, obviously from personal gain, there's a lot of learner out there who are extremely motivated and they take outside courses, they go part-time, they go back to university, they go back to college. I've done it myself. It took me 5 years to do a master's degree. Like, I was extremely motivated. Like, it would never happen without motivation. But I'm not saying this is the case for every Canadian. So a lot of people cannot do this, or for all kinds of reasons. So striking the balance between the learner and the business need. I think this is really where the sweet spot should be.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think when I kept going to school, my parents were like, "Are you ever going to finish?" So, but yes, there is definitely there are certain people who are able to invest in their education more. I'd like to ask Andrew, maybe Ellie, if we can get Andrew back up on screen. There's a really interesting question here, Andrew, which of course I find very interesting because we're very finely attuned to equity dimensions at Future Skills Center. And I think both you and Alex, and it's come up in our conversations as well with JP and Ish, have mentioned, that employer-sponsored training is not equally distributed. We saw some of the regional disparities that Alex pointed out in terms of the kinds of investments that are made. And we saw in some of the survey data about who's who's reporting that they're taking training a bit more. And Sadia has posted a question. Can you please talk about the gendered aspects of trainings? Are women and men taking up training in the same rates? Are they reporting? There's a question here about sector concentration. Are there more men than women in certain sectors? And the training availability. So do you have any, top of mind insights that from the polling data we've done?
Could just recap. Thanks for the question. I could just recap quickly because I think what we saw originally is just access to training, just in terms of we asked people, have you participated? The gender difference doesn't come up there in the first instance, but there are other differences. There's big age differences, of course. That's partly because younger workers are some of them are accessing training just because they're starting, but it's also because this is another topic. I'm already off topic, but we're investing less in skills of older workers, which is obviously an issue. But on the gender one, it's not so much an access, but it really came up only in the last wave when we asked this question about what the outcomes were, because it doesn't really make sense. If you think of, if men and women are equally likely to access training, then they should be equally likely to get the benefit of that training. And then we saw that that's not the case. So that's actually, we can't explain it all yet because it's just raised that question that, there's something that's happening where men are able to connect that more directly with a concrete outcome. And as I mentioned, I did it quickly, but that's because it's sort of the newest research that we've just sort of gotten and shared with our partners at DI and the Future Skills Center, and we haven't sort of sat down and looked it over. Is that there really seems to be an issue, particularly with women with children at home. And so, I mean, it's not an expression I use all the time. I'm not sure if it's the right expression, but there seems to be a kind of mommy track penalty here that men are accessing training that's sort of allowing them to continue to kind of progress, I guess, up the ladder is one expression. And women in that situation are not. And so that right now we have clues more than answers. And so all we can do now is just kind of follow those clues. And as I said, some of that's kind of fresh research that's underway now. That maybe we can share back once we have that in publishable form.
Oh, that's a good reminder to me to do the training I don't want to get on a mommy track as someone with a young child at home. But thank you, Andrew. That's a good reminder and quite heartening as you say that, like, we are seeing some similar training uptake numbers. That is heartening right now. But yeah, this all depends on us staying on top of the data. I'm glad Alex is back because Alex is at the heart of so much of what we're doing at Future Skills Center on these topics. So maybe I'll ask Alex to kick us off with you've been following this discussion, any remarks or comments that you want to add, and then I'll just do a little tour de tab and have a little closing remarks before we wrap up today. And I'll share some final thoughts and reflections as well on behalf of the Future Skills Center. So over to you, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I really appreciate what the work that JP and Ish are doing. The great FSC partners, the research that we're doing with Environics is great. But I think, you know, I think the one of the message that we're taking away, and it goes back to what I was presenting on our paper on employer investment and training, is really how much we may be constrained in terms of being able to develop innovative approaches to tackle some of these problems because of the lack of data. And certainly certain organizations like EMC, JP's organizations do very good surveys of their own manufacturing members and have data on, you know, what's the average level of investment in skills training and that sort of thing. Well, you don't see that across the economy, across all sectors. That kind of research is done because particular organizations and leaderships of those organizations decide to do that kind of thing. So we really do have a patchwork of data still, and I think that's kind of the message that's coming out of this. You know, and I think there's a broader question about what is it, you know, what is the responsibility of the employer to pay for training? What's the individual responsibility? What's the public sector's responsibility? What's the public responsibility for paying for training? And that's kind of a broader debate, but we don't think about certain things in Canada that are maybe pertinent to this debate as well. We have the highest rate of post-secondary education completion in OECD countries, for instance. Does that mean that, and a lot of that training is precisely in short-term certificate kind of training. That partly explains why we have such high rates of post-secondary completion. So does that make up for the low level of employer investment in training? Is it because we have more skills, because we have more of the population in post-secondary education, coming out of post-secondary education? We don't know. I mean, but it does point to sort of where the issues are around needing better data sources on this kind of stuff, so we can start triangulating it with what we know about post-secondary completion rates and other sources of data.
Thanks so much, Alex, and couldn't agree more. You know, in this case, it's not just the data nerds and the researchers who need the data, but it's the implementers, it's the policymakers, it's all of us. We really need that base of data to understand what's happening. Maybe Andrew and then Ish, and then I'll end with JP with a few final reflections before we wrap up.
Final reflections?
Yeah, you get a minute.
Well, I might give a few seconds to some of the others. I think what I'll say is that we've been going through all the suggestions and questions and appreciating them all, and some of them are, as inevitably happens, sort of thinking ahead to the, like, well, what's the next thing we need to find out? There are a number of very helpful comments around foreign credential recognition, trying to again unpack these, you know, what's behind these issues of equity. So I think I don't really have more details to kind of put on the table right now, but I just wanted to thank people for the comments. And I've kept my notebook here of things that we may have missed in the work we've done so far, that if we're fortunate enough to be able to continue, that we can try and pick up. So thank you everyone for the comments.
Thanks, Andrew. And one of the things we're excited about the work we're doing with Environics and Diversity Institute is there's multiple survey ways over time. So we're really able to track like the story over time, and are working also to put that data set out publicly so other people can use it as well. Ish, any last remarks?
Yeah, I would just like to comment one thing, and I'm hearing the issue about employer-sponsored training and so on. I was thinking that if we had a framework for employers-sponsored training needs now, and that portal probably would have some tools for employers to assess where their employees are and where they want to go. So if we have a framework that describes all of these things, and then on the other hand, we have a framework for will, you know, working, because there are many formats of the will, and including the micro-credentials. How do we connect the two together? So if you have this tool from the industry side, that what are the needs and so on, then we have this tool on the academic side, training deliverers, and then it's a possibility to connect them much easier. I think that is for example, if you have let's say we have a template for will learning, then you can ask the universities and colleges to fill up their templates to show what type of training and program they need. And on the other side, the industry has looked what they need and then see if they can try to match it and so on. So that will be something
Yeah.
at a national level. I would like to suggest that we do really at a national level. I know what University of Waterloo has some of these frameworks. McMaster has a framework, but it would be much nicer to have two frameworks, employer-centered needs, and then the academic side, then bring them together.
Lots of room for coordination and driving action. I love it. And I love that you're thinking of new ideas and approaches. JP, last thoughts?
That's been a great conversation. At EMC, we're on a road show. Last December, we were in Nova Scotia. Last month, we were in Edmonton. They call micro-credential just like the Far West, like the situation, and in Ottawa a few weeks ago. And really, it's all around talking to each other, collaborating. At the table, there's post-secondary institution, university colleges, industries at the table, government too. And let's figure this out. Like, I mean, this is not rocket science. Like
Sure.
as long as we can find the sweet spot for collaboration. I mean, we're looking for co-development, sharing content among each other, joint communication collectively. If you've got a good program, a good micro-credential, that makes sense for the manufacturing sector. I'm interested in it, and I hope you could do the same with our content when it's validated. And then standards. We didn't talk about standards. Like, standards is so critical, and that's for me, standards goes with usage. If the industry is using it, that's the standard. Like, that means they're finding relevancy around it. Thank you very much, Tricia.
Thank you so much, JP. And thank you to everyone. Thank you to Andrew and Alex for the presentations, and JP and Ish for the panel. I mean, I heard you talking about all the collaboration needs and everything, and I'm like, soft skills, gonna need those soft skills to keep talking and working together. I'm going to turn it back to Elise. I'll say you've heard lots from us at FSC about how important we are. I'll let Elise close it up, but thank you to everyone. And I just love these conversations. And I know that we need to have more of them in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you. Over to you, Elise.
Thank you, Tricia. What an engaging and exciting conversation we had today. I was also furiously taking notes as everyone was sharing. So thank you to our esteemed presenters and panelists for sharing your insights and expertise with us. I mean, I think we heard a lot of wonderful takeaways about, what is the value of training and ensuring that employers see it, looking at this triple helix model, bringing together education, industry and government as we move forward, and really thinking about how equity is at the heart of the data and what we're learning here. So this is the end of our conversation. Thank you to everyone who shared your wonderful thoughts and questions in the Q&A, and thank you for listening along with us. We ask if you want to take a few minutes at the end, there will be a survey to complete on today's webinar. We would love to hear from you. And thank you very much. And there will be a recording of this session sent out in the coming days. Thank you and have a great rest of your day. Bye.